Hello everyone, welcome back to Powerful Nothing and Magic the Gathering podcast. My name is Dan, better known on the internet as Too Sweet MTG, and as always I am joined by my co-host James. How's it going, dude?
Yeah, it's going pretty good. Clearly, I think I need a better known on the internet thing. I don't have my magic pseudonym yet. We'll have to work on that, I think.
James from the Powerful Nothing podcast. We can say that if you want.
Let's do that. Yeah,
let's do that. Okay.
Yeah, I'll put it on my LinkedIn immediately.
Good man. Cool. We have an awesome episode for people today. As always, time codes will be down in the description below if you want to jump around. We have two main topics for today. The first is we're going to be doing a post-review of the MTGO Vintage Cube season that has just finished. I know James has been diving into a lot of drafts, so we're going to get some cool takes and what we liked from the most recent Cube season. And then we're also going to be talking about some advice for upgrading a cube. It's definitely a topic that I haven't really seen many videos or articles online for, but I have seen people asking for it. So that's something we're going to be looking at a little bit later on. Our first section is, as always, is the news. And I think the only place to start is that the Wilds of Eldraine has been released. Pre-release was a couple of weeks ago at time of recording. The cards look to be making a bit of a splash in Standard and things like that. James, you were at pre-release. What did you think of the set? How did you find it? And what is your thoughts so far on the Wilds of Eldraine?
Yeah, the set seems fun. I think there's probably a good amount of depth to a limited format. I like the thing of they have a lot of the sort of powerful, essentially gold cards in that the adventure and the base card are different colors, but it gives you like a little bit of flexibility because you can cast one half even if you don't have mana for the other. And I think there's some interesting puzzles to figure out in terms of how you build your mana base, what your fixing looks like. I know in my drafts on Arena, I've been drafting an unreasonable amount of Prophetic Prisms and loving it.
Yeah, I was going to ask how's the fixing in the set, because there's no uncommon cycle of land fixing or even common fixing land fixing. I know that I believe there's an Evolving Wilds in there. And is it just that and Prophetic Prison are the main ways that you're kind of splashing for your adventures, as it were?
So, yeah, it's interesting. There aren't the cycle of dual lands we sometimes see. But there's Prophetic Prism, there's 2-mana, 2/1 reach and colorless that filters your mana.
Oh, okay.
The Green Dork also filters your mana. And there's a couple of ways to make treasure, including one in colorless. And what that kind of adds up to is that if you have fixing, it's all 5-color fixing.
Right, okay.
Which is interesting. So you can quite often be once you have the ability to splash one color, you can kind of splash all the colors. So you can go quite deep with this.
You can get greedy, is what I'm hearing.
Exactly.
I like that.
Exactly.
Good. Okay.
Especially with the adventure cards where, you have the backup of, even if I don't draw my fixing, I can still cast the other side of it. But yeah, I've drafted quite a lot of 5-color Prophetic Prism decks in my arena drafts, and it's been a delight.
How highly are you drafting Prophetic Prisms? Be honest with me, James.
Not that highly. I'm not taking them second. I'm taking them fifth, sixth sort of range, and I think people just aren't taking them highly yet. I suspect that will change at some point during the format.
Yeah, I could imagine so, because the original Eldraine was actually a kind of a mono-colored set. In the original set, you had Adamant. You got rewarded for spending 3 of the same mana on a spell for an additional effect, which is very a mono-colored Matters thing. It does seem like there isn't a specific mono-colored Matters theme in this set, but what's carried over is the lack of just regular fixing. It sounds like you have to work for it that little bit more. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. But I think if you are willing to put that work in, I think you do get rewarded. And obviously Prism is the best one. But there's also, the 2-drop guy that filters mana and whatnot, I think are also totally playable. And the rewards are there to do it because the gold cards are good enough.
No, that's cool. What archetypes or what color combinations have stood out to you as being quite strong or quite powerful? Or which ones, to be honest, have you enjoyed the most so far?
I think probably one I've enjoyed the most. I've had a couple of blue-red base Splash for World decks, which have been a lot of fun. Green-white Enchantress has had one draft where that really came together, and that worked really well. But I think it does kind of rely on uncommons and above to really work that deck. And then I think Rakdos is quite good. The whole that sacrifice theme is pretty nice. I think one of the sort of overriding things I've taken away from my draft so far is that like bargain's really easy to enable and really good.
No, that's fair. Yeah. I've only played a little bit of the set. I was away for pre-release and have been on holiday the subsequent week. So I've only played a couple of games at home with some pre-release kits. The main thing I found is just that there's a lot of removal. I don't know if that's just the pools that me and my wife opened, but like we were completely different colors. And tapping things down or removing things from the game was not an issue for either of us at any point.
Yeah, 100%. I think, the removal's good, and that means that you're playing an attrition game a lot, and therefore, like, card draw becomes quite important. I mean, not like necessarily literally cards that say draw 2 cards, but ways to get ahead on cards, 2-for-1s, become much more important.
Yeah, some kind of advantage, which I'm assuming works with a set with adventure. As we kind of went over in our set review, they are effectively 2-for-1 stapled onto a card, so that does kind of make sense.
Yeah, 100%. I think a lot of the ones at common are like not quite 2-for-1s. It's like a lot of them, the adventures, like, you know, make a food or something that isn't really worth a card. But a lot of the uncommon ones are very much 2-for-1s and are very important. And then you also have some of the actual card draw spells are, I think, quite good as well.
No, that makes sense. And yeah, in the few games I've played, I was actually quite impressed. I don't know, again, I'm not sure if this was just my wife's pools, but she really beat me down with a number of like buffed up rats. It's just like they became like 3-3, like 2-2s and 3-3s, this kind of stuff. Like, but getting counters as well. But the rolls do add up on a board state pretty quickly, especially when when black has some token stuff with the rats and stuff. You do feel like you can, like, even with all the removal, it can be quite a bit of a clock. I was quite impressed by it.
Yeah, 100%. And there are some good synergy cards that really utilize the rolls really well. Like green, for example, has a 3-mana 2/3 uncommon that when an aura enters under your control, you draw a card. And that's just like an insane card advantage engine if you can build the right deck for it.
No, that's awesome. The main one that I kind of got beat down by is Sahar had Spellbook Vendor in her pool. Just played a creature on turn 1 and then played this. And then just the rest of the game is just, how big is your stuff? What? Unbelievable. Yeah, Spellbook Vendor is the one that every turn you can pay 1 generic to put a sorcerer's roll on it, which is, it gets +1/+1 and whenever it attacks you, scry 1. It's like when you get that on like 3 creatures, you are digging. Like your next couple of draws are going to be quite good. You're really setting it up.
Oh yeah, you're not running out of gas, and even if you kill the vendor at that point, there's still got so much value out of it.
No, 100%. I guess the other thing I kind of want to touch on, obviously this set does have the mystical archives in it. How have you found those affecting Limited? From my end, it basically almost train wrecked my sealed pool because I had no red cards, but I opened a sneak attack, and it took everything in my power to not just build that.
Regardless of the amount of red cards you have, do not put sneak attack in your limited.
James, don't tell me this.
I think it's interesting. I think they range from interesting build-arounds to traps that will kill your win percentage. But I think there are some strong ones. I've really liked actually Hatching Plans in blue. It's one of the uncommon ones. It's a 2-mana enchantment, and when it's put into a graveyard from play, you draw 3 cards. And you just bargain that away is pretty easy, and it's like 2-mana draw 3. It's pretty phenomenal. But there are some like really bad ones, specifically at Rare, which people really like trying to play. I had one opponent specifically who put a Mana Flare into play, and I had a flying creature on board with fire breathing from a Dragon Mantle, which I proceeded to activate 10 times in the next turn and kill my opponent with. Don't put Mana Flare in your decks.
For those unaware, Mana Flare is a very old enchantment. Oh, it's from Alpha. Okay, that tracks. Whenever a player taps a land for mana, that player adds 1 mana of any type that land produced. This is a very old templated card. It is symmetrical. Yeah. I've only seen this in like realistically only in like old cubes trying to like have like a storm thing going on. But
Yeah, pretty rough one to try and get going in limited, I think, Mana Flare.
And also, obviously, like the set's actually only been out for like a week now at a time of recording. Previously was 2 weeks ago, so it's still very early on in like the standard cycle. It does look like a couple of cards are making a bit of a hit, especially like the main new deck that kind of looks to be around because of it is like a Golgari mid-range deck, which obviously I love. Kind of revolving around the Mosswood Dread Knight. It's the 2-mana 3/2 in green with trample that when it dies you can cast it for its adventure. The adventure is 1 black, you draw a card, you lose 1 life for a sorcery. So it's kind of just this like grindy value thing, which is kind of exactly what Golgari wants to be doing. And obviously we still have Shieldred the Apocalypse and Liliana the Veil in the format. So it is very much, this is Jund in all but the fact it's not running red, basically, from what I can see. Looks a lot of fun. Yeah, it's also running some cards like Lord Skitter, Sewer King, and Blossoming Tortoise. So that looks to be like a cool new deck that's kind of really come to the fore from Wilds of Eldraine. Going back to some older formats now, I know that Beseech the Mirror is making quite a bit of an impact in Legacy. That's the 1 triple black sorcery with Bargain, which you search your card for a library, exile it face down, then shuffle. If the spell was bargained, you may cast the exiled card without paying its mana cost. If that spell's mana value is 4 or less, put the exiled card into your hand if it wasn't cast this way. Basically, you're using this to bargain away an Orcish Bowmaster token and go and get a win condition. I edited a video today on the wife's channel, The Legacy Gambit. Go check it out, everyone. James, you want to talk us a little bit about Mono Black Beseech the Mirror featuring Leyline of the Void and Helm of Obedience?
Yeah, this is a cool one. So Helm of Obedience combo is something that's been around for a while and not been that good. So the combo is, if you have Leyline of the Void in play, then when cards would go to your opponent's graveyard, instead they go to exile. And if you combine that with Helm of Obedience, which is a 4-mana artifact, where you can pay X and tap it, and your opponent will put cards from the top of their library into their graveyard until a creature card or X cards are put into a graveyard this way. But the cards never go to their graveyard, so X is never reached, and you exile your opponent's deck. And this Beseech is kind of the perfect card for this deck, because it gets and casts either half of your combo for 4 mana, and you don't want to have to play for Helm of Obedience because it doesn't do anything on its own, and this kind of helps you get around that. And you're playing like a bunch of Chrome Moxes and Mox Diamonds and whatnot to get your bargain going. Also, nice inclusion like Vault of Whispers, the black artifact land, is just a swamp that you can bargain away.
Oh, that's pretty spicy.
Yeah.
Like
Similarly,
that,
like Urza Saga, you can bargain away. So yeah, it's got. I think this deck has some good stuff going on. It seems like a lot better than the older builds of Helm of Obedience. Having said that, the old ones were kind of bad. We'll see if this is like actually something that sticks around or just like flavor of the week and it dies off. But definitely a cool deck.
Well, I think so it's recently got obviously Orcish Bowmasters as well as Beseech the Mirror. So it's definitely one that's kind of had a big kick the last couple of sets, basically. All the last 2 sets in a row has kind of made this deck pretty good. I do know this took down a big Legacy event in Europe recently.
Yeah, and obviously, and it got Dauthi Voidwalker in the not too distant past, which is again a combo piece, which is also a card that.
Oh, does that work the same way as the?
Yeah, that does the leyline thing.
Nice, yeah. That does seem like a pretty cool one. And also, I'm not going to use the word budget about this deck, but it's got no dual lands in it, so that's nice to see. So that's at least good for. The most expensive card is Shieldred.
Oh, really?
Because obviously it is, because it's Shieldred. Yeah. I'm looking at the cost now. It's Shieldred is more expensive than Ancient Tombs.
Yeah, that checks out. A lot more people jamming Shieldreds than Ancient Tombs.
Nice. Right, so let's move on to our first main topic of the day. So the MTGO Vintage Cube has just finished another season, and I know, James, you've been churning through a lot of games. How many trophies did you get in the Vintage Cube? For those who don't know, James and our friend Josh, better known as Fire Truck, Modo on YouTube. See, Josh has an alias as well, James. So we do need to actually work on yours a little bit. But
yeah, it's an issue.
But you two do a trophy race every season. It normally gets pretty tense. So before we jump into the actual kind of like what we thought of the cards, give us a bit of background. How was the trophy race? How did you finish? How did Josh finish? Who came out victorious? And what was the final numbers?
Okay, yeah, it was a really tense finish this time, actually. So with at the time that Vintage Cube was meant to go on that offline, I think we were on like 15 trophies each. But then there was some unexpected downtime, and they therefore decided to extend it by 1 day.
Oh,
and
okay.
in the extra day, so I guess like one more evening, basically. I think in that evening we were both just like could not lose games. So, and I think by the end of that evening, we were on 20 apiece.
Oh, wow. Bloody hell.
And then I managed to sneak one in by logging off work at 4 p.m. just before the queues closed. I got to 21.
Good man.
Taking full advantage of working from home. Yeah, no, it was cool. It was, I think lots like 7 consecutive trophies at the end. So like 21,
wow.
21 and 0.
Wow.
So yeah, it was a cool finish for sure. But yeah, no, it was a really fun season. I think the changes they made were really positive, actually, and definitely like added some new interesting decks.
I guess. Well, yeah. I think probably the best place to start is to race to 21 trophies that's exceedingly well done. What generally did you find you had most success with, or was it kind of a bit of a mixture? Or was there anything in particular kind of like you kind of found yourself ending up in more than others?
Yeah, definitely a mix. I think it's quite well balanced at the moment. I don't think there's anything that you should be like forcing or anything close to that. I think broadly you do want to be like staying open, seeing what's open, and going from there. I think for my playstyle personally, I really enjoy drafting the combo decks, but I think in general I do win slightly more with the fair decks.
Okay.
So like when I was tryharding at the end of that run, I was drafting quite a lot of like blue white tempo, black interactive decks, like sometimes with reanimated package, sometimes not. And I think I had like one mono red deck. I don't think the aggro decks are fantastic anymore. I think they're fine. Like mono white's still very good. I don't think mono red's that good anymore. But yeah, I'd say in general, I think it's really balanced. Like definitely I was like racked up quite a lot of the trophies with combo decks earlier in the season. I think they're very strong. I think if you can pilot them optimally, they're maybe the best thing to be doing, especially because there's sort of a lot of pieces to them that are very important, but people don't take that highly. They're kind of either new additions or they've become better over time and people haven't quite clocked on yet. And you can start like wheeling some really important pieces in those decks, which is a nice place to be.
From listening to that, I was going to ask you how highly you're taking these combo pieces, but if they're wheelable, I'm assuming that means you can just take good, solid interactive cards like some counter magic or something like that, and then wheel your combo piece. Is that kind of how you found it right now?
Yeah, in those combo decks, so like blue blaze combo decks, so Storm, Dream Halls, that sort of thing. Generally, the things you want to be taking early are like counter spells, a bit of removal, and then mana. Like obviously, fast mana is the most important thing in most decks, and then selection. Cantrip's still great here, and you're hoping to be able to wheel those combo cards.
Okay, as that makes sense. Well, kind of let's dig into some of the new additions. We'll kind of start with combo-ish. This one seems, this is a combination, not straight a straight combo. Let's talk about the addition of Flash to the cube. Flash came in along with Worldspine Worm and Triplicate Titan. So sort of the combination here is that you're casting Flash. Flash is 1 and a blue for a spell that basically lets you put something into play, and then unless you pay the rest of the cost reduced by 2, it dies straight away. But with things like Worldspine Worm, Triplicate Titan that leave behind a board state of creatures, you're kind of fine with that because you're paying 2 to put like 15 power onto the board, something like that. How did you find? Yeah, how did you find this Flash package, James? Out of interest.
I thought Flash was really good, actually. Yeah, I think the Worm's great. I actually don't love the Titan for it. I think 3/3/3s are just a lot more beatable than 3/5/5s. Like, it's still great if you do it on turn 2, but later in the game that often isn't enough, whereas the Worm often is. And then the other one I think is really good is Woodfall Primus.
Oh, nice, yes.
Yeah, it enters, you blow something up, it persists back, you blow something up, and you're left with a 5/5. Yeah, I thought Flash was really good. Quite truthful as well, like stuff like Spellseeker goes and gets it, you can mystical for it, and blue combo cards are pretty good. It's also nice that if you're in a deck with something like Dream Halls or some alternative way to put these things into play, it's nice. The combo pieces like Worm and whatnot also work really well with sneak attack, so that's quite a nice crossover. Like, ideally, you don't want to be in the spot where I have these 3 giant creatures and they're complete blanks unless I have exactly Flash. Because then you're in trouble if it gets discarded or you just can't find it or whatever. You want other stuff to do with those cards, but I think Flash is probably the best thing to do with those cards. I think it's really strong.
No, that makes sense. No, you've mentioned a card there that came in before, but I'm wondering if it's kind of settled a bit better now. So Dream Halls came in the previous update, I think, about 3-4 months ago. It's another symmetrical effect. It lets players cast a spell by discarding a card that shares a color with it. Has Dream Halls found a bit more of a place now that we have this Flash kind of stuff in there?
Yeah, Dream Halls has been phenomenal. I've
good.
been drafting a lot of the Dream Halls decks. Firstly, they're so fun. They're just so fun to play. But I think they're also really, really good. So I think the thing that really put them, and I think it was already fine, but I think the thing that put it over the top was they added this additional package of let's cast big spells where they put in Mizzix's Mastery, which lets you play a card for free from an instant or sorcery for free from the graveyard. And then to kind of support that, they added like Magma Opus, which is very powerful 8-mana instant, Cruel Ultimatum, and Brilliant Ultimatum.
Ooh, okay. I did not think that the ultimatums was where you were going with the Dream Hall stuff, but that's very cool. I like that.
Yeah, it gives you another real like hammer to end the game with once you've got your Dream Halls in play. But in a lot of ways, the best thing really to be doing with Dream Halls is just wheels, and there's a lot of wheels now. So like draw 7s of some description, because often you'll be like playing Dream Halls with only a few cards left in hand. You can you hopefully have a card to pitch. You can cast your Wheel of Fortune, your Time Twister, whatever it might be, draw back up to 7 cards, and now you have a first go at casting your 7 cards for free, and you're going to have enough. If you've built your deck correctly, you'll have enough to win the game from there most of the time. So either you win by like brain freezing them out, or you cast an ultimatum a couple of times, because you just need to build your deck in a way where you don't run out of cards. So things like Dig Through Time are really good here, because it can go and get like 2 powerful cards from the top of your library. Or even like Regrowths are quite strong, because you can keep recurring your ultimatum. And, when you cast Brilliant Ultimatum and draw 5 cards and gain 5 and kill something, you don't need, it's going to be hard to fizzle from that point.
No, that's pretty cool. Is any, this is not just me like thinking like, I like this kind of package, it's kind of just ticking over a little bit. Is anything else playing like the ultimatums at all? Because they're sorcery, so you can't cast them with the Gear Hulk, can you? But yeah, is there any other way to kind of cheat these spells out, or?
It's pretty much just Mizzix's Mastery and Dream Halls. I don't think I have seen one hard cast, but you don't necessarily have to be the all-in Dream Halls combo deck. You can, like, I remember having one sort of red, sort of blue-red temporary value deck, and I had like a bunch of looting that I was going to play anyway, and I had like a Mizzix's Mastery, and I put 1 ultimatum in the deck. Because I figured, like, when it's bad, you just loot it away, and it makes your Mizzix Mastery into an incredible draw later.
I don't think we really touched on the looting too much when we did the overview, but yeah, there's stuff like Scrapwork Mutt came in. That's the little artifact dog that lets you loot, and also one that I'm actually kind of considering wearing at some point soon. Bitter Reunion, the obviously a worse version of Faithless Looting, but it can just randomly give your creatures haste, which I'm assuming could be relevant when you want it to be.
Oh yeah, 100%. Cast your Worldspine Worm, give it haste, pretty strong. Also, I think good if you're playing red in your Reanimator deck. I had a couple of Rakdos Reanimator decks this season, and this card's great there because it loots away your reanimation target, and then bring back your Archon and giving it haste is generally going to be game over.
Sweet, that's pretty fun. Let's move on to some more combo stuff now. Talk to me about Displacer Kitten, James. I saw you draft quite a lot of these, and there was from some of the pictures and from some of the chats, there's more infinite combos with Displacer Kitten than I was initially aware of. Do you want to talk about this adorable little kitten?
I would love to. Displacer Kitten is the archetypal card that no one is taking at the moment and is really, really strong. Not saying you should be like taking it, in the first couple of picks, but if you have a deck to support it, I think it's great. So it's 3 and a blue for a 2/2. So it's not stunning on the vanilla test. However, when you cast a non-creature spell, you can exile any non-land permanent you control and return it to the battlefield. So really the crucial thing here with this compared to other similar effects is that non-land permanent. You can flicker planeswalkers, you can flicker artifacts. It's doing a lot. So some examples of ways you can go infinite with this are like with Tamiyo, the 4-mana Tamiyo that minuses to regrowth. If you, for example, play a Lotus Petal, sack it for mana, regrowth it with Tamiyo, replay the Lotus Petal, Displacer Kitten flickers Tamiyo, sack it again, replay it, regrow it again, play it again, you'll get infinite mana. And then on the last loop, you get a spell to play with your infinite mana. Even better scenario with Tamiyo and Displacer Kitten is any take an extra turn spell. You're going to take the extra turn, flicker your Tamiyo, regrow your take an extra turn card, do the same thing again next turn, continue until your opponent gets bored and concedes. Also, stuff like 3 mana Teferi with any 0 mana artifact will draw your deck with Displacer Kitten. Because you're going to minus the Teferi on your 0 mana artifact, draw a card, replay the 0, Displacer Kitten flickers Teferi, you bounce it again, you keep going. If it's a Mox, then you can also get infinite mana. Very... And even the non-infinite stuff often feels like it's going to be infinite. So, for example, I'm comboing off with Displacer Kitten Minsc & Boo.
Oh, James.
I know.
How are you comboing off with that? Okay, all right. Talk me through the line.
Well, what you do, right, is you make a big boo, and then you play a spell, you flicker the Minsc & Boo, you sack the boo, you draw like 7 cards, you're going to have found more stuff to play, then you're going to play your more stuff, you flick a boo again, you flick a Minsc & Boo again, you make another boo, and then you sack it again, you draw more cards, and if your opponent isn't dead, you'll have drawn into more cards, which you can play and keep going.
Okay,
it's not like strict, it's not like deterministic, but if you have like a say 3 or 4 0 mana artifacts in your deck, you're going to be drawing so many cards that you're going to get there. You do have to be careful. At some point, you might have to deal the final points of damage by sacrificing a different creature because you can deck yourself doing this.
Good. Okay, love that.
But I think Displacer Kitten is one of those cards where it's like, if you put it in your deck, you'll be like, oh, I don't have the thing I wanted to combo with this. Oh, it's phenomenal if I blink that. Even just blinking like Urza, for example, you get into Construct every time. You're generating more mana off the Construct, so you can keep playing more spells. I found to be really strong.
Wow, that seems like a lot of fun. I'm kind of glad am I glad that I picked up a Displacer Kitten a while ago and this might be coming into mind. We'll see. We'll see how many games I lose to the nonsense that you've just just mentioned. That sounds very cool and like very explosive.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Right, so let's some more combo stuff now. There's a bunch of infinite mana combos added in, but in the form of Kinnan, Bonder, Prodigy, and Zerda the Dawnwaker. Basically, the way they kind of work is specifically they both go infinite with mana rocks that have the ability to untap themselves. So like Grim Monolith and Basalt Monolith. Kinnan also boosts up your Llanowar Elves. Zerda can be your companion. Let's go. Did you see these kind of infinite combo stuff, this infinite mana stuff come up that much, James?
Yeah, I think you did infinite mana with both of them. It's a real thing that you can do. It's probably not meant to be like your whole game plan, but it's not a big cost to include like Basalt and Grim Monolith in your deck. Worth noting, Kinnan is only infinite with Basalt Monolith. Zerda is infinite with both. Because Grim costs 4 to untap and taps for 3. So Kinnan makes it tap for 4. You can tap and untap as much as you like, but you are not accomplishing anything in isolation. But Zerda discounts by 2, so Zerda is infinite with that. But they're both infinite with Basalt Monolith. Yeah, I think this is good. I've put it in combo decks because it's like you want these mana rocks anyway, you just want more mana, and at some point you've pulled this off. If you have like one actual kill with it in your deck, and then you're playing some like expensive draw spells or some draw 7s, or maybe you're like playing a Tinker deck, for example, and you can use that infinite mana to cast a Portal of Phyrexia, for instance. You don't have to be like just I need to find Walking Ballista exactly to kill them. You can You can be spending like you can be using it to spend 10 mana. You don't have to use actual infinite. I think these are good. I've seen Zerda companioned a couple of times. I think it was medium success, but it looked a lot of fun. No, I think these are good. Definitely like worth keeping in. It's not the sort of thing you're doing like loads of times, draft in and draft out, but when it comes together, it's cool.
Nice. Well, let's stick on big mana for a second, because next up we have a couple of cards. I think I could imagine High Tide was in before. I don't actually remember. It might have been one that went out or came back in. But High Tide with Candelabra of Tornos. Basically, High Tide doubles the amount of mana that your islands taps for, and then the Candelabra is X and untap X separate lands. I'm assuming that's been errated, but let's go with that. So, James, with these two, you can obviously just make an obscene amount of blue mana. What are you really doing with that blue mana? Or what kind of deck does this go into? Is it Storm?
Yeah, it's pretty much Storm.
Okay, good.
Yeah, you're casting some draw 7s. It's worth noting that so many of the things we've talked about, it's like, what are you doing with them? You're casting draw 7s. The draw 7s have got so much better with all these new combo decks being added, and like new mana engines. It always used to be like you'll take the draw 7 when you have something to do with it, whereas now it feels like you can take draw 7s pretty aggressively, and you'll find a way to make them good, you know? But yeah, you cast your draw 7, you cast your card draw spells, and eventually you like brain freeze them out or whatever. So if you're doing the High Tide thing, I also really like Candelabra with Tolarian Academy.
Okay, yeah. Artifact makes it, nice.
Yeah, I mean, it's an artifact, and when your Tolarian Academy's really got going and it's tapping for 6 or 7 mana, you can pay 1 mana to untap it with your candle and keep going. Also cute in those decks, so sometimes you're playing stuff like Paradoxical Outcome, so you can return the Candelabra to your hand and then tap it again. Keep going. Also, the Saheeli, is it Planeswalker, interacts with it really nicely, where it's making artifacts for your academy, and then it can also turn one of those servos into a copy of Candelabra and tap your academy again.
That's dirty, James.
Yeah, you can
really
get up to a lot. I've definitely been at points in that deck where it's like, well, I need to find my win condition, but I have 60 blue mana in my pool, so I'm sure we can do something.
Somehow. Okay.
A lot of clicking to kill with Walking Ballista on Magic Online, but you can get there.
Okay. Nice, that sounds cool. Let's talk about 2 cards they added, which I don't think we were both super high on, as a Lord Protector and the Might Stone and the Weak Stone. I think the idea with these is that they were both, in theory, trying to do something individually, like as a Lord Protector makes artifacts, instants and sorceries, but specifically, I think artifacts in this build of the cube cost 1 less. And the Meek Stone is kind of like a colorless removal spell. I think that was the argument for them both coming in. Obviously, they can meld into Urza Planeswalker, which should just win you the game on the spot. Okay, real talk, James. At any point, did you see these two meld? And if not, were either of these good enough by themselves?
I have seen a screenshot on Discord of someone melding these cards. But I think the meld trigger was maybe on the stack, but their opponent conceded, which is quite rude, I would argue.
That is unbelievably rude.
Yeah, if your opponent gets to meld there I think it is only good manners to let them do it. But also the fact that it wants a screenshot tells you that it's not something that it happens too often.
Yeah.
I think the Might Stone and the Weak Stone has some utility. As with many things, really good to displace a kitten. You get 2 artifact mana and 2 cards when you kitten it. Also, just it's kind of nice with stuff like Phyrexian Metamorph. Copying it to keep going is pretty good. I kind of think you want it in if you're a really, really good Academy deck, and you're playing like Mishra's Workshop as well. It's probably has some applications, but I don't think it's great. I've not seen do much. The best thing you can do with Urza, I think, is there's an interesting combo with a new card that came in this time, Mystic Forge, which lets you play artifacts from the top of your deck. And I think part of the joke with Urza is that if you combine Urza with Mystic Forge and Sensei's Divining Top, then that will let you draw your deck. Because top puts itself on top of your deck to draw a card. And you can cast it from the top of your deck with a Mystic Forge, and because of Urza, it will cost 0 mana instead of 1 mana. But honestly, if you have top, I think the top Mystic Forge thing is good, but I kind of think you don't need to put this horrible 3 mana card in your deck to make that better. I think it's already good enough, and I think the real killer for Urza is just being white. You don't really play white in these decks very much. So yeah, I've not seen Urza do a lot.
No, exactly. They haven't really lent too much into the white artifacty thing. I mean, Stoneforge is just in here because it's a good card. Porcelain Legionnaire is in here because it's just a good aggressive card. There's not really too much reason to play white with your artifacts in this current iteration of the cube, basically, from what I can see.
Yeah, for sure. The only one that really comes up for me is balance. Because if you play out a lot of really cheap mana rocks and then balance.
Does balance not say artifacts?
It crucially does not say artifacts.
And planeswalkers. Okay, love that.
That's kind of a joke about it. You've just got to turn your resources into things that aren't mentioned on the card balance. And then you cast the card balance, and your opponent puts their lands in their hand and their creatures into the bin and looks sad.
Okay.
But yeah, that's pretty much it for white of those decks.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's fair. All right, changing tack a little bit now. This was kind of a little package they brought back in after cutting it from the last update. We have Titania and some of more the land sacrifice stuff come back in. I think we also had exploration coming in to help the fast bond player out a little bit, let them get basically have another copy of the card, at least in some way. How did you find that, James? I think I definitely saw a screenshot of a fast bond in a pool, but did it see much application specifically with Titania or anything like that?
Yeah, I think this deck's good actually. I think you can go in a lot of different directions with it. You can do a very fast combo-y build where you're trying to get fast bond going with a Zoran Orb and a Crucible, and at that point you'll gain infinite life, you'll make infinite mana. But I think there's also a good grindy version that's utilizing strip mine and whatnot, and I think Titania's kind of great in both of them. 5/3s are really big. Titania kills you very, very quickly. I've definitely had games where I've put that deck together and I'm haven't found my Crucible effects, but I just have Titania and a Zoran Orb, and it's yeah, fine, I'll put my 6 lands in the bin. I don't need many more, you're dead. Yeah, I think Titania is a really nice ad. I think Exploration's exactly what that deck needs. I think the card Fast Bond is one I don't pass very often at this point. I think it's really, and not just because I like it, but I think it's actually very good in a lot of these decks. Yeah, I think nice ads, these ones. I think one of my favorite decks for the format was I had a lands deck utilizing Bazaar of Baghdad and Life from the Loam to get back my strip mines and whatnot.
Ooh,
it was
okay.
It was great fun.
Sweet. I love anything that makes Bazaar of Baghdad playable. But and you can dredge as well. Love all that, Jane.
Exactly.
So I think obviously there wouldn't have been any Wilds of Eldraine cards in the queue because it wasn't out when it came out. But Lord of the Rings cards, I'm assuming, made a bit of a splash. Yeah, when we spoke about it before, kind of like we all knew that cards like Orcish Bowmasters, the One Ring, and Fourth Aerlingus, which I think we both quite like. How did they play out in any of the other new cards from the Lord of the Rings?
Yeah, the 3 you mentioned are all phenomenal, premium cards. Bowman is a great value card on its own, and then if you combine it with any draw 7s, it becomes a combo piece as well, which is phenomenal. The One Ring I take very highly because it's basically good in every deck. Obviously, you can cast it in any decks, it's colorless, and there aren't many decks that don't want 4 mana, draw 8 cards, and get a fog,
Yeah.
It's just really strong. For Faelingus, I've been splashing very aggressively. I think the card's really good. I had a deck I trophied with on the last day was basically Dimir splash for Faelingus.
That's good game.
I think I had 8 Teferi as well, but yeah. No, the card's really good. It's just in the aggressive decks, it's phenomenal at every point of the curve. In the slower decks, it's still really good because you play it when you get up to 6 or 7 mana, and it will generally end the game really quickly. Yeah, no bad things to say about any of these cards.
No, exactly. And also, I can imagine Fourth Aerlingus because it is an X spell. We have spoken about a lot of ways of making a large amount of mana in the past, 25 minutes or so. So I'm assuming big X spell that scales well is probably going to be pretty solid in that.
Exactly. As fireballs go, this is a hell of a fireball.
Cool. Yeah, I guess kind of just rounding up, talking about individual cards. Is there any other cards that kind of stood out to you that were kind of either new additions or ones they brought back in that kind of work better with some of the other cards?
Yeah, so one I think I really underrated going in was Guardian Scale Lord. This is the 4 and a white for a 3/4 flyer with backup 1, and when it attacks, you return a permanent with mana value X or less, where X is power. This card's just really strong at the top of the white aggro deck. You're always going to have good stuff to get back, pretty much, by the time you get to that stage in the game. Really nice. Because it's not just creatures, right? You can get back Parallax Wave or Planeswalkers. It can get quite big. If you back if you back up onto itself, and if you're backing up on something else, you get that value on the turn it comes in. I think this card, I think it's not it's still a 5-drop. It's not the most important thing for your white decks, but it is a good 5-drop that you should be playing most of the time, but you get it. Sail into the West, I thought was a really nice ad, just because there's a lot of good things to do with draw 7s. This is an instant speed one, that's really nice. And then a card that I just don't really understand why it wasn't in before was Life Death. Admittedly, I didn't know this was a card before it pops up on the cards that are being added.
How have you never seen Life Death, James?
I started playing Magic quite a long time after you, Daniel. So this is the main mode is Death, being 2 mana reanimate, basically. They cut Makeshift Mannequin for this. Makeshift Mannequin's really bad. Huge upgrade. I also had some fun combining the life half of this with Gaia's Cradle. It's quite cute.
Oh, nice. Yeah. Yeah, it makes all your lands become 1/1s, so you can generate a bunch of mana.
Yeah. And I think really good ads this time around. I think they made some positive changes for sure. I will not be revoking my my criticism of Evolve Sleeper though, but people kept trying to cast that card against me, and I'm pretty sure I didn't lose to it all season. It does not do anything.
Yeah, I think that kind of brings me on to a couple of like follow-up things I was going to pick your brain on. So archetype-wise, mono black aggro was something that they tried to bring back in. Apart from Evolved Sleeper, was there anything else gave you hope that it could be decent in the future? Because like cards like Misery Shadows, like by themselves is individually strong. I do like Tenacious Underdog, but it's a very fair creature. I like Gix Yawgmoth Praetor, but it could be a bit slow for the MTGO Vintage Cube. Kind of, are we just off mono black aggro entirely? I think when we spoke about it before, we were kind of saying it might be a stopgap until they come up with something else. But
yeah, bring back the sacrifice stuff. That was a lot better. All those cards you mentioned, like Underdog and whatnot, is objectively a fine Magic card, and in a slightly lower powered cube, I'm sure it would be good, but you just can't. This is just not the sort of thing you can expect to be doing in Vintage Cube and get a lot of wins. Really, it just doesn't really beat anything, right? Like some of these cards you can put in your deck as a 23rd card in your like medium blue black mid range deck, but you're not happy about it.
No, definitely, yeah. It just seems alarmingly fair, and also I'm just looking at like Concealing Curtains, like 1 mana 0/4 defender that can turn into a 3/4 menace.
I don't hate that one as much, actually.
Really?
I think it was just because hand disruption is really good.
True.
And because people are doing these like combo stuff, right? And a lot of it's pretty vulnerable to getting 4Cs, even if it's like not a good 4C. Still, and like 3/4 menace is like ill-threatened stuff.
Yeah.
Right? It can like attack down some planeswalkers. I think getting like a bit of disruption on it is fine. I think it's not as good as these cards, but it's in the realm of like the Kitesail Freebooter, Tide Hollow Scullers of the world, which I think actually play pretty well. But obviously, like you'll have to put more mana into it, which isn't ideal.
No, that makes sense. Was there any other kind of archetype-specific stuff that you saw in this update?
I think the main other big picture thing I'd say is that, and this is more for, and this I think applies to a lot of cubes, blue doesn't feel like as busted as it used to. Like, I think it's still the best color. I think there's still loads of great blue cards. I'm still drafting a lot of blue decks. But it doesn't feel like blue is the only color that gets to do a lot of these unfair things, and the other colors were all left behind. Like, I had some really strong Rakdos decks, for example, when you can be like playing fair without blue cards. Because, things like Grief, things like Lalia, Fable of Mirror Breaker, I think these like cheap threats where it's like, you get the sort of power level that you used to need to pay like 4 or 5 mana for, so you'd have to ramp into them, and you get them at like 3 mana, so you play them early in the game. If you can set that up with like some hand disruption and whatnot, then I think, it kind of used to feel like to play an interactive game in these really high power cubes, you had to be playing blue most of the time, and I don't think that's the case anymore.
No, that's cool. Yeah, like that actually sounds quite healthy, if I'm honest with you. Like just looking at the breakdown, blue does have more cards in it than any other color, but that will just happen when you can run old super broken cards. Like green doesn't have a Time Walk, like this kind of stuff. It doesn't have an Ancestral Recall. These are cards that you want to see, as well as a lot of other cards as well. No, that's cool. I guess last couple of questions. I think from the sounds of it, you sound pretty happy with the state of the cube right now. Like, apart from mono black aggro, is there anything else that you would personally want to change, or anything you want to see?
I think there are decks which don't get there that often, stuff like the Urza stuff or whatever. But honestly, I'm kind of fine with leaving them there, because I think it's like, mostly it's like little packages of 2 and 3 cards, and it's not a great loss when they don't come together. And sometimes they do, and that's really cool. Now, I really like the changes they've been making recently, and is there anything I'd like to see change? I think I'm basically on the camp of, hey, you've done a couple of really good ones. Surprise me, see what happens. Because I quite like that they've been like making 50 odd changes every time, and it feels like quite a fresh format whenever a cube comes up, in opposed to previously it used to be like, yeah, here's 15 bad cards from a new set. Other than that,
100%. Yeah. No, definitely. Yeah. From a from an outsider point of view, I really like the sound of that, because it is a thing that kind of like, I mean, this must be one of the main reasons people go and play MTGO. So what? Ryan Spain took it over. This is his second iteration now. I mean, in each update, there's been 100 cards, something like that. It's been a lot. It will probably calm down at some point, just as he kind of like finds a place that they like it. But yeah, like you could easily change like 50 cards each time, try a new archetype, try something new, see how it goes. Like that does sound interesting, and it also makes it more interesting for players because there's something new for them to do each time.
Exactly, yeah. And you it's up for normally like about 3 weeks, and I think it's cool if you're drafting very differently at the end of that than you were at the start of that, because stuff has changed and you've worked out the new things that are good.
No, exactly. Yeah. Rather than just picking up from the last time you did it.
Exactly, yeah.
Awesome. Well, we're probably going to be leaving the MTGO Vintage Cube alone till probably about Christmas time. They haven't announced when it's going to be back. There might be something in the late autumn, maybe, but most likely it's going to be back around Christmas time, which is normally when we see it. So that brings us on to our second topic of the day. We're going to be talking about some tips and tricks for upgrading a cube. Kind of the idea of this is there are a ton of videos and podcasts out there on how to build a cube, and we will get to it at some point. We do have plans on actually building a cube on the show at some time in the future. But one thing I see people asking a lot of is how do you actually upgrade a cube? Like, what's the process? What should you be considering? That kind of stuff. So that's kind of what we're going to be going through today. This will primarily apply for all cubes. If you have a pauper cube, a peasant cube, or a powered cube, or anything in between, this should all work for that.
Yeah, so I'm really keen to pick your brain a bit here, Daniel, because I've never built a cube. I just leech off other people. So I'm quite keen to get a bit of an insight into how that process works. So I'm sure, apart from anything else, it would be a level of organization which is completely beyond me. But I think, yeah, so when we talk about upgrading a cube, are we talking about any sort of update, or are we talking about changing a significant amount of cards?
Yeah, so generally when you're updating a cube, there's kind of 3 different categories or 3 different times that you would want to make a change to your cube. So effectively, the first one is when new cards come out. There's sets every, I was going to say 3 months, but that's just not true. There's new cards coming out all the time. Maybe you want to try something new. The other time you might make a change is when something isn't really working, if you want to tweak something, if you want to make an improvement, that kind of thing. It's just swapping in a couple of cards. And then the major updates are things like archetype changes or package changes. We kind of spoke about them with the MTGO Vintage Cube, where kind of like, Aristocrats came out last time. And then that meant that like a whole 40, 50 cards had to change in certain type of colors. That's definitely the bigger and more complex one, is the archetype and package changes.
Yeah, that makes sense. So to go through those different scenarios, when a new set gets released and you own a cube, I'm guessing that looking through that spoiler, you're picking out a ton of cards that you're like, oh, that could be cool in my cube. That could have a nice little combo application. That could slot well into this deck. How do you go from that to picking the cards you do want to add and finding what you're taking out and identifying those replacements?
Yeah, so the thing with new cards is you're kind of, at this point, you already have your cube. You know what the kind of the archetypes and the packages that you already have in the cube are. Basically, when new cards come out, I'm kind of looking for things that will complement archetypes that are already in there. This is when you're specifically just making changes. Sometimes cards come out that make you want to build around new archetypes or can bring archetypes to the fore. That's kind of a bit that's a different beast. We'll kind of get onto that in a little bit. Kind of when it's just when it's a card that comes out and you think it would improve something that's already there, that's pretty if I'm honest, that's one of the most straightforward things to change in a cube, because basically in an ideal world, you have a 4-mana creature and they bring out a better 4-mana creature that does a similar thing. That's a nice simple swap. Generally what you're trying to do is kind of find things in your cube that are kind of similar colors and similar enough mana, and swap those out, because you are trying to keep the cube structure together. Like, it's something I really need to do in mine, because I kind of put mine together 4 years ago now, and I've kind of kept the structure pretty good, but I'll be honest, I have not looked at the curve in my cube in a little bit. I've kind of kept it pretty even and kind of like to the eye it looks good, but it's something you need to be keeping in mind. Basically, yeah, you need to be keeping in the mana curve of all your spells, making sure that kind of you have enough stuff to do early, and you want to kind of keep the balances there. Like you can't really cut if there's this new powerful mono black 8 drop that you want to add, you shouldn't really be cutting like a card that costs a single white. You need to be replacing it for something similar to kind of keep the cube in some kind of cohesion.
Yeah, that makes sense. So when Ragavan comes out, you can make the judgment call that it might be a little bit stronger than the Jackal Pup in your cube, and that's an easy swap.
Savage, James. You know I love Jackal Pup. But yes, that is that's it exactly.
Yeah, makes sense. And I think the next sort of changes you mentioned were when you decide that something in your cube isn't working and you want to replace it or add something else instead. How do you make that call, and at what point? Because presumably, you need to give these things some time, right?
Mm-hmm.
People aren't going to figure out the best way to use the cards you put in the cube right away necessarily. They're not going to draft it optimally right off the bat. When do you make that call that actually this probably isn't going to work, much as I liked this package of cards of this archetype, then we need to switch it up?
No, definitely. So you always want to give cards and packages kind of times to breathe. I'm going to give this a bit of advice, fully aware that if you look at the history of my cube, you will see cards come in and out pretty quickly. Like, sometimes when things aren't working after like a draft or two. Realistically, you do need to give it time. Like, sometimes if it's individual cards, you'll know sooner rather than later. For things like archetypes and like packages, you do need to give it time for people to actually kind of work out what is going on, how to draft it. Sometimes there is definitely like a thing of like, basically it works both ways. Like sometimes you'll put in some cards and people won't really know how they go together, so they kind of get left to the end. Sometimes it's new shiny toy and it gets taken really early and then it doesn't go in someone's deck, or they end up in a different color, that kind of thing. Like there can be new toy bias a little bit. If I'm honest, the main thing to kind of work out when something isn't working is just talking to your playgroup. Like, I am quite, I don't want to say annoying, but like after a draft, I'm very interested in kind of like, I will ask like my playgroup kind of like, what did you like? What did you draft? What was good? And like, if I've just added some cards, or if there's cards that I have kind of seen myself that I don't think are working, I'll kind of ask people, what did you think about this? And likewise, if they come to me and say, oh, I don't think this is working, or I don't like this card, it is something I will listen to. There can be kind of biases of like we've all been there when kind of like when a card is just like Fourth Aerlingus could be an example of this. Kind of like it could be a card that in some cubes might be too strong. But like it works both ways. It's not just a card isn't working because it's too weak. A card could not be working in an environment because it's too powerful. Like I could see in a lower powered cube, if that just like whitewash, like if you add a card and it just whitewashes people, that is something that kind of, it's best to find out. Like, it's best to be honest and just talk to your playgroup about it and find it out about it. Because like it's something we did recently. Like we recently cut demonic consultation from the cube because everyone kind of like, even the play, like I think you were one of them. Like even the people playing it and like doing well with it was like, this is actually a bit too strong with Thassa's Oracle. Is there anything else we can do? And then kind of we put in Doomsday and Inverter of Truth to kind of keep the deck there, but kind of power level it down slightly, just to kind of make it more in line with what everything else is doing. In terms of making the cuts, it's a similar thing to the individual ones, but basically you're looking, like you can either look for a card that does a similar effect. If you think a card is too good or too strong, you can look for a card that does a similar effect. Or you can just cut it and look for something that supports a different archetype. Again, you're kind of trying to keep the cohesion level of the cube. And with cube, there are plenty of just generically good Magic cards out there. Most of the time, if something isn't working, it's because you've kind of gone, you're trying something a little bit different. You're trying to gone a bit off piste. Like we all know, like Swords to Plowshares is a good card. That's probably a bad example because that's probably going to be in a lot of cubes. But like there could be like an interesting red 3-drop that you want to try that does something cool and works with some, and you think might work with some of your archetypes. Actually, like an example of this recently is I've been trying Top of the Deck Matters. Hasn't really been working, if I'm honest with you. I think I'm the only one who's drafted it. I had fun with it. I did able to like repeatedly cast a Path to Exile from the top of my library with like Jace the Mind Sculptor. That was pretty good, but that it came together once, takes up a lot of cards. No one else has drafted it. That's kind of a sign that it probably shouldn't be in there if the only person putting it together is the person who specifically put it in.
I mean, I guess part of the thing is, right, if you put it together and then it was really good and you beat a bunch of people with it, then people will start playing it, right?
Yeah.
Whereas if you put it together and you're like, yeah, I think this is a pretty good version and it doesn't feel powerful enough, then that's a reason to cut it, right? Like even in some ways, I'd guess more so than if it just hasn't been drafted. Like if you see a deck get drafted and you're like, yeah, this is a great version, this is exactly what I was imagining this deck would look like when I put all the cards in, and then it still wasn't powerful enough, then that probably means it needs to change, right?
Oh no, 100%. Yeah. It's kind of like if the ultimate test is you're right, is if the whole deck comes together, or if a card that you've put in is in this most like optimal environment and it's not pulling its weight, then that's a sign that it can't be there. The other thing as well, sorry, I should also mention that I do at the end of drafts is ask people kind of what they got past last. Like, what was the like? What are you not playing? What is not exciting that you don't like, or what hasn't made your deck? Sometimes, like the last card won't go in your deck, but sometimes you will draft some cards early, and then you actually it ends up not making the cut. That's another good way of finding out if something shouldn't be in a cube. Is if you have 23 other cards ahead of it, like, and you're in the and it's going in that deck, like what 24th card needs to be cut? Like that's something I do quite regularly, and just kind of keep an eye out, kind of like what like I have put in cards for specific archetypes before, and I have played those archetypes and seen people play those archetypes, and they've not played these cards. And if they're not playing those cards made just for those archetypes, then that is a very good example that they should come out.
Yeah, that makes total sense. I think it's interesting hearing you talk about it because as a player, I think there is something to, yeah, as you say, keeping stuff in for a while. Because I quite like the idea that there are archetypes of the cube that haven't been drafted. And I can maybe this card I'm getting past last all the time is actually good, and letting people, like, giving people a bit of time to find that, you know? And, like, people don't look at your cube cobra and like figure out the best thing to do right away, right? I think that's kind of part of the appeal of drafting the same cube multiple times, is you get to figure out what's good, right? And I think we kind of saw that with the artifact deck a little bit, where it's kind of been in and not been drafted much, and then a few cards were added, and then it suddenly started winning a lot.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, kind of. If I'm honest, with the artifact, I stopped being subtle with the artifact one. I just started ramming in more artifacts every update. I was like, draft this bloody thing, and kept on going with it.
I think that kind of leads into another thing I wanted to ask, actually. If you identify that you don't think an archetype is working, you can either cut it or double down and add more cards to try and fix it, right? Mm-hmm. How do you make that choice?
So I will be honest, in terms of making archetype changes, a lot of it is just the decision to make a change is often when I get bored. Like, I'll be honest, one of the reasons I built a cube is because it's like a really big commander deck. It's just it's like, this deck is 541 cards now rather than 100. And it's kind of, yeah, so in terms of the actual kind of like, yeah, the idea is it's basically when I see something cool that I think could be interesting or hasn't been done before, changing something like an archetype or a package is normally the biggest changes that you'll make in kind of one go. If you end up changing multiple archetypes in multiple colors, then it can be a lot of cards. I think the most I've ever done is like 120 in like one go. That is quite a lot. So in terms of swapping out an archetype you do normally find in two color combinations. So we'll use kind of like aristocrats as an example. Like that's often found in like Rakdos. A lot of the cards in those specific colors will be leaning towards an archetype. So for example, in like Rakdos, if you were supporting aristocrats, you would have cards all down, like you would have a bunch of cards in red, a bunch of cards in black, and also you would have your gold cards. A package is a little bit different because that's effectively a grouping of cards interact with each other. So something like Kiki-Jiki Splinter Twin with Pestamite Deceiver Exarch is like a 4-card package, like combo, basically. That is a package of cards that you can add to a cube to support something new and cool. Like Dark Depths, Thespian Stage, and Vampire Hexmage and Primeval Titan is also a package. It's kind of it's a thing of cards you can add. In more higher powered level cubes, you tend to see more packages. And so like the Vintage Cube, as we were talking about, it's not like Simic is doing this. It's not like Orzhov is doing that. It's more kind of like powerful cards and packages that you can kind of piece together with lower powered cubes. And like basically it's kind of following like set drafts. Like it's a thing of like when you draft Wilds of Eldraine, there will be uncommon signpost cards that show you what the archetypes are trying to do, because they're kind of made for all players, basically, is how that kind of works.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point. And there's also things that really bridge that gap, right? Like, I think something like Reanimator could be included as an archetype where you have 30 cards that really pull you in that direction. You're playing your Putrid Imps and, like, you have, like, 8 reanimation spells, a bunch of added. But it could also be a package, right? Like, you could put Reanimator in your cube as I have, like, 3 reanimation spells. There's probably some fatties that you're doing other stuff with, and you maybe chuck, like, an Entomb in there. And you know what? You're going to be playing, like, Jace Vryn's Prodigy anyway in blue, and you'll find ways to get them into the graveyard, and it kind of just works. And the other nice thing about having packages, right, is they can go in a variety of color pairs often, especially with the manas tends to be really good in cubes now with triomes and whatnot. You know, you can definitely see like people playing Splinter Twin in their base blue-black deck. You see Reanimator packages in black combined with basically any other color, right? I actually think Rakdos Reanimator is really good at the moment in Power Cube, for example. And it means that there's just a broader variety of decks that get drafted, right? It's not like, oh, you're this color pair, so you're doing this thing.
No, 100%. It's definitely something that kind of packages have over archetypes. You're kind of letting your drafters work out what it is that they're doing. With like when I talk about kind of like archetypes, it is more based on like limited draft. It's kind of something that I think we spoke about this before. Kind of came in like the original Dominaria, and since then, kind of every standard set has had these 2 color color pair combinations that you're kind of building around, and that kind of has moved itself over to how a lot of people build their cubes. It is also the easiest way to explain to someone how to build a cube from scratch. It's kind of, okay, work out what all your color combinations are going to do, and then you can fill it in. That is actually, I think it is the best way to start building a cube. And also it's a good thing to have as a base, because there'll always be some players who aren't as experienced, who haven't done as much kind of like I've not done anywhere near as much of like high powered level cubing as like you have, James. Like you've done 20, or you've won 21 in the past like month. I probably cubed 21 times maybe this year, for example. Because I tend to do it in paper a bit more. So I think they both have their uses. I think the archetypes are good at kind of giving like general themes to a cube, and then the packages are really what can kind of make a cube like more memorable and more interesting. When people build cubes, there's definitely this temptation, just like, okay, we're just going to jam in 360 of just the individually most powerful cards. But with packages, you can make cards combined be more than what they're worth. So like we talked about like Kiki-Jiki Splinter Twin earlier, like there's an argument that just like raw power level winning a game one-on-one by themselves, something like Glorybringer is more powerful than Kiki-Jiki. We can all agree the combination of Kiki-Jiki plus another value creature or a combo creature is probably better than Glorybringer and any other creature, because of how you win.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I think it's interesting point as well about, I think you do need a balance of the two. I think the point about newer players, or not even newer players in terms of like new to Magic, but people who like haven't cubed a bunch is a good one. Like, imagine a cube where the whole thing was just about these little like 4 and 5 card packages where it's like, well, this card's only good if you combine it with one of these few other cards. I think like a bit of that is cool. But if the whole cube was just that, it would be completely inapproachable to someone who wasn't like very into cubing specifically, right? Whereas I think, so for example, if people want to dive into the Modo cube, my general advice is like draft some aggro decks or draft some like draft mono red, draft mono white. We can think about drafting some like blue based interactive stuff. We can think about drafting Reanimator because that's easy to understand. Don't touch the rest of it until you know what you're doing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Like, I'm first picking this fast bond. You shouldn't at the moment.
Yeah, you'll also see someone else, they could play it against you, and then you can kind of see some interactions that you weren't necessarily aware of before.
Yeah, that's interesting. So obviously some of the cards we're talking about that fit into these packages aren't inherently powerful cards on their own. Sometimes they do nothing on their own. How are you balancing that between your cards being powerful in a specific scenario but narrow versus cards that will stand on their own and maybe have some upside with certain synergies?
If I'm honest, I think with packages, like when you're adding a small portion of cards that only really work together, you're kind of accepting that they don't work with other things. Basically, you're adding them in for the upside of doing the cool synergistic thing, like, for example, like Dark Depths Thespian Stage. You're adding those both in for the cool upside of making the big squiddly monster, but then you're kind of accepting they won't have that much utility outside of that.
I think the other time it becomes interesting is when, because obviously a lot of these cards, they don't, as we say, stand on their own, but they'll fit into multiple different packages, as we'd say, of where they do very powerful things. For example, a card like Fast Bond and Vintage Cube, very happy to take early, even though it's not a powerful card on its own. If you play like Fast Bond with 22 other like powerful interactive spells and card advantage and threats, the Fast Bond will not be good for you. But Fast Bond's great if you're doing Crucible stuff. It's great if you're doing Draw 7 stuff. It's phenomenal with Upheaval. It comes a point where the card goes in enough different places that it actually becomes a really high pick, even if it's not a card that you're just gonna happily put in every deck that can cast it.
One of the other benefits of adding packages to a cube on top of the archetypes is that packages, there are good ways of kind of replicating certain like decks. Like I've seen people add like Death Shadow to their cube, and like they've added this kind of like, there isn't effectively, a package is good when there isn't enough density to kind of do a whole archetype, but there's this really cool aspect that you like.
That's interesting.
So yeah. I've seen people add like the Fire Covenant card, like ways of losing life with like Death Shadow, and then there's like a 3-mana worst Death Shadow from Return to Zendikar.
Oh yeah, there's a 2-mana one, right?
Yeah, it's basically like it's not enough for a whole archetype, but you can add this little package of cards basically, and you can do something cool with it. I think that kind of brings on to like the makeup of packages. It does really depend on the size of your cube. So let's go back to Kiki Jiki, Splinter Twin, Pestamite, Deceiver Exarch. If you're in like a 360 cube where every card is going to be drafted by 8 people, you can put that in and someone will end up with the Kiki Jiki deck. It will be support. Like one person will have the opportunity to get the whole archetype. But when you go above that, when you go to like 450 cubes or 540 cubes or even up to 720 cubes, for packages, you really need to think about the numbers that you're going to be putting in, because some cards won't be opened. It's one of the, so with the Kiki Jiki Splinter Twin combo, there aren't really any effects that kind of copy Kiki Jiki or Splinter Twin or do a similar thing, but there are similar effects to Pestamite and Deceiver Exarch. So you can add things like Zealous Conscripts or Restoration Angel. You can get more density that way. It's one of the reasons that kind of like that combo does quite well, because there's also a ton more untap effects. There's like Village Bell Ringer if you want to go really deep. There's like Bounding Crisis if you want to go even deeper. There's a few other things that you can do with that. It's one of the reasons that like Dark Depths Thespian Stage does struggle. Like it's cool and I really like it, but there's definitely an argument that it shouldn't be in my cube because it doesn't come off that often. It's a 2-card combo where basically you have to see Dark Depths plus something to remove the counters from it. My cube is 540. A third of the cube is not being opened. You could easily, so statistically, one of the cards isn't going to be opened. If one of those cards is Dark Depths, then the other 2 cards don't do anything, or they don't do the thing that the package is trying to do. There's an argument that Thespian Stages could be okay. Like if you're copying like your Gaia's Cradle or your Academy, then that's pretty good. Then that kind of has some play. Vampire Hexmage can remove Planeswalkers and has now actually got better with the battle. That can kind of tutor it up and you can remove the counters from it.
You can reset your sagas. That's pretty good.
Oh, okay.
It's not that good.
I mean, there is probably a world where resetting your Urza Saga might actually still be really good.
Actually, Thespian Stage Urza Saga's really good because you can, if you Thespian Stage, I say really good. It's cool. If you Thespian Stage copy an Urza Saga on like the second chapter, then it copies the ability of tap make a construct, but it doesn't become a saga. So it's
oh really? Oh, it just keeps getting counters.
It never goes away. Yeah.
Oh,
yeah. Wait, no. Well, it does do that, but then because it keeps the Thespian Stage ability, you can then copy something else.
Oh, nice.
And it's still going to have that tap ability. So you can just hang around and make some sagas, make some tokens.
Yeah, because it's a thing that gains the abilities of the 2.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Okay. So if you've decided there's a cool new package of cards you want to add, say it's like 6 cards, how do you figure out what your cuts are going to be to make room for that?
So the main thing I look for, and this is getting harder in my cube, the kind of the more packages you have, basically you're looking to cut fair cards. You're looking for, this is where you make that choice we kind of mentioned earlier between like the Glory Bringer and the Kiki Jiki. This is where you looking to add something where this combination of cards is stronger than just one individually good card by itself. Like we all know like Inferno Titan is a good card, but like is it that interesting? Is there something cooler you can do with that space? And you need to be quite brutal. You just like if there's something in your cube that is like fine and good, but is not kind of exciting you, find something cool to go in. Like those are the first ones that I look to replace. Maybe this is a bit kind of up myself a little bit, but I want like every card in a cube to be able, someone to be able to think of something cool to do with it. Obviously, with like Lightning Bolt, those cards there is a subset of cards that kind of you do need to kind of make just the deck ticking over. So it's still or to make decks work. Like you need to run your lands, all this kind of stuff. But like there is a large portion of kind of like creatures and spells between like 2 and 6 mana that can be quite interchangeable, basically. Those are kind of where you're looking to cut to add your packages. Obviously, like we said previously, you want to make sure they're in similar colors, similar mana values to things you're removing. Generally speaking, you can go cheaper on the curve. Like things will get more tricky if you start cutting like 2 drops and adding 6 drops. You can get away with it more if you cut a 6 drop and add like a 4 drop or a 3 drop. That is less the end of the world. Just basically better spells are more efficient. That's kind of fine, basically.
Yeah, that makes total sense. I disagree that there are no cool combo applications of Lightning Bolt, though, actually.
Okay. Does it involve Displacer Kitten by any chance, James?
No, it involves Time Twister, mostly.
Oh, okay. Good.
So you can get to a point in the game where if you have like a diamond and a Time Twister and a regrowth, then you can just like keep time twisting and like regrowing your twist, and because your deck gets quite small. Every time you're gonna like find your Lightning Bolt, and Lightning Bolt can be your kill condition. Like every time
I love
you're gonna Lightning Bolt them.
Okay.
There's better ways to do it, but it's a way you can do it.
I feel the part you were enjoying there was Time Twister, but okay, we'll go.
The Lightning Bolt can be a Stormwind con. Is my main point. Cool.
Good. Nice.
Okay, so that makes total sense for a package which might be of the sort of say, 4 to 10 card range. What if we're talking about an archetype, which is generally going to be a much bigger chunk of cards? I presume making room for that is a bit more challenging.
Yeah, 100%. When it comes to archetypes, so again, this is like the 2-color combination of cards that are in gold and then in the individual colors going through the cube. This can definitely be trickier, and is ones that like sometimes you'll just miss some cards that you've added. Like the easiest place to obviously start is just with the gold cards. So if you're changing an archetype, the easiest place by far to make the change is to the gold section, because that, as we kind of spoke about before, that's kind of the signpost for your drafters of what this color pair is generally going to do. So effectively, however many gold cards you have, say you have 4 cards for every guild, you have at least 4 cards dedicated to that archetype. Why that's good is, yeah, obviously it shows your drafters that what that color is trying to do, but it's also a reward for the person in those colors, because monocolored cards are more likely to be taken just inherently because they're going to be in more decks than guild cards, because it's less likely there's going to be multiple people in the same guild as you, unless they are specifically in the same deck as you. But that's a drafting issue, less of a deck construction, cube construction kind of thing. And yeah. So making room, you're basically obviously you're going to be, I'm assuming, removing an archetype as well. So you can pinpoint the cards that are specific for the archetype that you are removing. So with any archetype, there will be cards that you specifically added just for that archetype. Effectively, kind of like a lot of archetypes will have monocolored cards that are effectively gold cards. Kind of, we'll talk about, like we mentioned aristocrats earlier. So a lot of the time you'll find that in either Orzhov or either Rakdos. Let's use Rakdos aristocrats as an example. Say you were either adding this or cutting this. It kind of works both ways, actually. So basically you're identifying cards that are for this archetype. So your gold cards are things like your Judith, your Mayhem Devil, your Falconeth Aristocrat. That's nice and simple. That's very straightforward. Those are the gold cards. You have room for those. You can put those in. The cards that are next are the cards that need to be in the cube to make the deck function. So for aristocrats, it's your things like your sacrifice outlets. It's things like your drain effects. So you're going to be looking at cards like Yawgmoth and Blood Artist. These are cards that not a great amount of other decks are going to want. So they're kind of a gold and a half card, if that makes sense. It's kind of, you still need to run these to make it work, but you don't want to run too many of those. Like, you don't just want to run a ton. You can't have your black section all being sacrifice outlets and drain effects, because then what are the other black decks going to do? So you kind of sprinkle them in. When there are cards that overlaps with other archetypes or with other decks, that's when you can run more of those. So like specifically for aristocrats, you have things like your Rebel Master cards. They're kind of creatures that make more creatures, which an aristocrat deck loves, because you can sacrifice them, because you can sacrifice the creatures and you get your drain effects, and it makes the engine work. But there's plenty of other decks that like a Rebel Master, like Mono Red loves a Rebel Master, kind of like a Stompy kind of deck loves a Rebel Master. And there's tons of examples for that in so many different types of cards all up and down the curve. Like specifically for aristocrats, you could run a card like Bitter Blossom. Aristocrats loves a Bitter Blossom, but then like a mid-rangey, slower deck also likes making 1/1 blockers to stop the aggro player. Like, there'll be these flex slots like everywhere in a cube. Like, I'll kind of go over some examples of ones I have in mind, and hopefully that will help people listening kind of find ones in their own. Because the idea is that with these flex slots, you can they're types of cards that you were already running, but you can tailor them to suit the archetypes in your cube. So, for example, in mine, there's like a human matters sub-theme in like Boros in white and red. So for my white aggressive cards, I've made the vast majority of them human. So like I'm running cards like Champion of the Parish and Thales Lieutenant over like Isamaru and like a Donto Vanguard. Then around them, most of my cheap creatures in white are human as well. So like individually, Champion of the Parish is not as good as like Isamaru. Like a 1-mana 1/1 is worse than a 1-mana 2/2. But when it's combined with more humans, Champion of the Parish becomes more powerful. As a card that goes in the Boros humans deck, as well as just like the mono white aggressive humans deck. Then in blue, because I have like Reanimator as a sub-theme in Dimir, I'm running cards like Thought Scourer and Consider as cantrips. Cubes generally want cantrips. Like most blue-based decks care about like filtering or casting spells in some way. But by running Thought Scourer and Consider, which fill up the graveyard, it like helps out the Reanimator decks or some of like the big delve spells also in blue. Then in black, like again for graveyard decks, like I'm running a card like Putrid Imp, which is only for Reanimator really. But then we also have a card like Rotting Regisaur, which is good in Reanimator. It's not as good as like Una's Prowler as a Reanimator card, but it just goes in black aggressive decks way better. So it has some nice crossover there. And like a big one in red is with like Burn. Like obviously in a powerful cube, you're going to run like Lightning Bolt. But when you get down to like the 4th or 5th version, you do have some flexibility. So in mine, because I have like artifacts in both Rakdos and Izzet, I'm running a card like Galvanic Blast over something like Firebolt. Firebolt probably has more raw upside as you can use it twice, but with the artifacts around, like Galvanic Blast has the potential upside of just becoming a second copy of Lightning Bolt. So with the synergy, it can be better. And then in like green, because I have like a Gruul Monsters section, I'm not running like more standard 2-mana dorks that you see in a lot of cubes like Sylvan Caryatid or Wall of Roots. I'm running Biophagus, which taps for mana, but when you cast a creature with it, it comes into play with a +1 counter on it. Then I'm also running Armored Scrap Gorger, which has like some graveyard answering utility. It ramps you and then also becomes a 3/3 that you can then start turning sideways with the rest of your monsters. Like everything I've just mentioned is technically less powerful than other alternatives out there. But when they're combined with your archetypes, the synergy really comes together to make an overall more powerful deck.
And then in terms of, if it's an archetype like Aristocrats, for example, you're using... there's a few different slots of things we need, right? We need our payoffs for stuff down, we need our sack outlets, we need our token makers. How do you drill down on like how many of X, Y, and Z you actually want to put in the cube?
The hard numbers are always going to be very difficult. One way you can do, which I did quite early when I was building my cube in the first place, is you can actually like basically build a singleton version of what you think the deck could look like. Just like get the cards out in front of you, curve out a deck of 23 cards. Put like you can build a version with the cards that are in your cube already, and then see what it needs, see what spells it's missing, see what you think it needs to actually kind of make it a solid deck. Like I know plenty of people who when they built their cubes before, built decks out of the archetypes and brought them down. Like, okay, you play this against this. It's a good way of testing to see things if are powerful. That's a very good way of doing it. If like you don't, if like you're cubing like once a month or once every other month, and you want things to be ready for the time that you bring the cube. We're in a bit of a fortunate situation where kind of we not in the summer because we're all off doing stuff, but kind of like a lot of the year we're cubing like every 2 or 3 weeks, so we can kind of I can test my changes out on you directly, and you don't get a choice basically.
Yeah, we're just doing that, except 8 of us show
exactly.
up. And,
exactly.
We have a few steps first.
Yeah.
That's
exactly.
interesting. I hadn't thought of doing that.
I think in general, though, when you are adding an archetype or a package, I do think it's better to add slightly more cards than you think you need. This means that it's more likely to be played, it's more likely to be supported. Like people will see it easier. They'll kind of get the gist that it's something that's going on, and you'll be able to get more feedback on it quicker, basically. If you try and be subtle with something, it might end up not coming together as often, and you might not get the feedback that you want as quickly as you want. You can always rein it in. Once you're happy something is working or you like something, it's very easy to just kind of remove the kind of like the couple of edge cases, kind of like some of the worst cards from that archetype, to then make room for your next change, something like that.
Yeah, that makes sense. Like if you go in with a heavy hand, whether it works or not, you're getting information, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Like if someone drafted it and had a good version and it sucked, then it's annoying, but it's good information, right? Whereas if just no one drafted it, you didn't really get any information.
Yeah, 100%.
That makes sense. I think the other thing I think is probably worth mentioning with numbers is that not all the cards count the same for these numbers, right? Because if, say we're in Rakdos Sack again, and the token maker we include is a Goblin Rebel Master, then that's great because it's a nice crossover card. But as the Rakdos Sack player, a bunch of the time I won't get the Rebel Master that's opened because the mono red player will have taken it, right? Whereas if the token maker is a Jadar, say, then I'm like a lock to get Jadar if it's opened because no one else wants it because it's not very good. And like obviously there's a lot of upside to it having the more flexible one. Like generally that's a better thing to do because you want cards to have crossover. But it is a different level of support for the archetype if there's like his like 8 cards that only this archetype wants versus here's 8 cards that work in this archetype, but a bunch of other players also want them at the table.
No, exactly. I think that does kind of come back to like talking to your players. Like if you're So the example of the Jadar and the Rebel Master, that's probably a good one, because say there was an aristocrat player who just didn't get there on token makers because other decks were taking them up. That's a conversation that kind of or when we're playing Cube, I'm assuming we like the people that we're cubing with, and we're doing something that we like. So yes, it's just like we all talk about like how the draft went, how things went. Kind of like it's quite easy. We can get feedback. It's kind of like it can be a bit trickier on feedback sometimes, especially like say a deck didn't get there because it was missing a number of cards. Like as an example, it can be trickier the larger the cube. The larger the cube, the more reps you need to get in, because you need to be able to see the cards. Basically, like if all cards aren't being drafted, you need to give it time to see all the cards to be drafted. If it's like a smaller 360 cube and every card is drafted and you in theory get perfect information, that's something you can work out. Basically, it's do you need the Jadar, do you need the Rebel Master, or do you need both? Do you just need like say you've added an archetype and it's either not pulling its weight or it's not got there, there's basically 2 tracks you can go. You can either look at cutting it for something else that you think could be more powerful, or you can find ways to boost it up. And that's something as a cube designer you can be thinking about. Basically, if I'm honest, it doesn't have a definitive answer. It's always something that's changing because there's always new cards.
Yeah, that makes total sense. I think it's an art, not a science. Isn't it?
It's very fluid, and it's kind of why I think this conversation hasn't, like, the upgrading one is less common to have than this is how you build a cube from scratch, because from scratch it's like, okay, you can actually work out numbers of like this drops and this drops and this drops, but when you're updating stuff, you're kind of you're feeling it a little bit more than you are. God, can you tell I've just been to France?
Become so much more romantic in your cube outlooks in the last 2 weeks. Yeah. It's a marked difference. Yeah. So I think part of what I've learned listening to you talk about this is it sounds quite overwhelming with the possibilities that are available. Where do you think people can look for sort of inspiration for where to go, or get some input from outside? Because it sounds like you could easily get a bit of decision paralysis on what you can do with your cube.
Oh yeah, 100%. Kind of, this is part of the thing with maintaining and upgrading a cube, is you have literally every card in Magic ever printed available to you. I mean, realistically, we're only going to be looking at the good ones, so that does mean that the places to look are kind of like, there's plenty of places to take inspiration for. So when sets comes out, if there's cards that you like, that is a source of inspiration. Like there's plenty of, early on for me, I took a lot of inspiration from Dr. Ruler and Ryan Sachs's cube, as well as the MTGO Vintage cube. Like Justin Parnell's cube was a good source of information for me at the start. Also on Cube Cobra, you can just go to the homepage and just look at the most popular cubes. You can see what cards people are running. You can see popular cards that kind of show up in a lot of cubes. Those are generally more like the staples ones. It's the bits in between. It's like the packages, it's the archetypes. That's kind of how you can make it more your own. Another great way is just constructed formats. Like I was talking about the Death Shadow package earlier. That's because the person who put it in likes Death Shadow and wanted to try and make it work in Cube. If there's a deck you like in a certain format, like it could be Commander. If there's a deck you like in Commander, you can probably make a version of it work in Cube. How you power level it to the rest of a cube, that's kind of where you need to spend most of your time thinking. Biggest bit of inspiration, or the biggest source of inspiration I've had in the last 12 months or so, has specifically been from like Canadian Highlander. The fact it's a singleton format means that they have to go quite deep in their archetypes, whereas in constructed, kind of like you just run 4 of, you don't need to go super deep. Whereas with Canadian Highlander, you kind of have to run cards that in theory, like you see like the second best card in an archetype, the third, the fourth, the fifth best card in an archetype, and that's kind of how you can see how an archetype can work in singleton formats. So I will put links down to Ben Wheeler's Moxfield in the description, Like that's where I found ideas for like the Madness deck, like aggro artifacts, like the Goblin Welder decks. Like he was playing around with a load of them in Canlander. I basically looked at his Canlander lists and saw that the difference between the cards available in my cube and his Canlander list was like 6 cards. That's that effectively then becomes a package that I can add to my cube, and then I have a version of that deck in my cube. Obviously, you can then still tweak it, that kind of stuff afterwards. But like one thing I like, Canadian Highlander specifically, it's running a lot of the staples that Cube has, and then there's like small packages of cards to make a deck unique. Kind of like it's how I got the idea for like the Gruul Monsters deck I got from there. It was it effectively was like 2 or 3 cards to add. One of them was Minsk and Boo. We know that's a good card, but it's basically I find that's a good resource. Also, I find that that scene is very good at keeping up to date on current trends and using current good cards, or using new archetypes with the cards available. Because Cube is a bit more unwieldy, it's like it's a large thing to keep track of. Changes generally are a lot slower. A lot of Cube is kind of waiting for like the MTGO Vintage Cube to be updated and seeing what they're doing, and then it will trickle down. Whereas with things like Canlander and other constructed formats, it's very much you can keep up to date with the modern hotness a bit easier.
Yeah, that makes sense. I thought it was interesting. You mentioned power level there. Presumably, in a lot of ways, in a lower power level cube, that gives you slightly more freedom as the cube builder, right? Like to add different things. Like if you wanted to include, say, like food has been a really pushed theme in recent sets, and I think they're talking about it in Canlander, but I'm going to say the power level your cube is at, you couldn't add add food as a theme, right? Because it just wouldn't be powerful enough. Like the food payoffs aren't good enough really yet for that power level of cube. Whereas a slightly lower power level stuff like you can always power archetypes down by just cutting the most broken cards, but you can only power them up so much because only the cards that exist are your limiting factor, right? There just aren't food payoffs that are powerful enough, I would say, to cut it in your cube.
I would completely agree with that. The thing I would say is that if there's something you want to try, you can definitely give it a try. Like, I think you just need to be open to the ability, or open to the idea that with lower power level cubes, you do have the flexibility of trying more things, but also the things you're doing, they might not be as broken, as busted. Like you're not going to see like as many combos in lower power level cubes, or if they are, they're going to be like more like 3-4 card combos, which are still a ton of fun. When you're cutting things for power level, you do have to kill your darlings. Like you can't, if you're building a cube, it's yours. Realistically, do what you want with it. My advice would be, if there's an archetype that you really love and it's just not performing, no one's drafting it, it's just dead cards at that point. Like I spent so long trying to make the Madness deck work in my cube. And I think it's at a place now where it exists, but it's not an archetype. It's a package now that has worked way better. When it was an archetype, when it was like, this is what all of Jund is trying to do, I will admit that was a bit too much. There were too many cards in there that weren't doing things with other decks. It was what I was talking about earlier with the running too many sacrifice outlets. It was too many cards that no other deck wanted, really trying to make something work. That is the point where you, as the cube designer, will know deep down that you need to stop and pull back a little bit, because at some point you'll want to draft something else, and then you'll just keep seeing all these cards that you've put in for this archetype going round and around and not getting played. And Magic cards are meant to be played at the end of the day.
Yeah, Wild Mongrel was 15th a lot, wasn't it?
It's alarming how long Wild Mongrel and Noose Constrictor were in my cube. I love those cards.
Yeah, that is fair. Cool. Yeah, that makes sense. And then the other challenge, I guess, because we've talked a lot about making good choices, I'm guessing there's a decent amount of admin involved in maintaining a cube as well. Like, we show up and you always have all the right basics, all the right tokens ready to go. I'm guessing that stuff takes some time, and of course, acquiring the cards themselves is involves some choices on their own. How do you go about that?
So generally, when it comes to new cards, I generally pick up the ones I want to try and cube like 2 to 3 weeks after pre-release. That's generally the time when they're attainably cheap. Like, obviously, like something like an Attractor can have shot up in that time, but a lot of them won't have. It's also perfectly fine to proxy cards. I am a big proponent of, if you want to try, like, even if you know it's going to work, it's a cube. It's not a competitive REL. No one's going to be judging you. People just want to play Magic, play with the cards you want to play with. So proxying is also 100% fine. Like, I think when I built my cube, every card above 25 quid was proxied. And if I'm honest with you, because we play in the pub, like we play outdoors sometimes, like not having super expensive cards that can fall into drinks is not the end of the world. So proxying is very good. Just make sure they're legible. Make them as good as you can make them, basically. Like, if you can do color, awesome. Get a printer or find somewhere that can print them. Do that kind of thing. And yeah. Obviously, if you want to pick up the real cards, also fine. Whatever works for you. Like nothing should be, from my end. Nothing. I don't like the idea of anything stopping me from trying something new and cool in Cube.
Yeah, 100%. And I think the thing I always appreciated about the ones you made is, from the front of the cards, I think they don't have magic backs because you don't want your proxies to be counterfeits that people might trade and pretend they're real catch card. But from the front of the card, you could not tell that your cards are proxies unless you paid very close attention.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I think on all of mine, that somewhere it has like my name and then rules with a Z at the bottom. But yeah. Like I do think it's important to not have like full on counters. Like, if I'm honest, like I partly do that at home because my wife plays Legacy, so I don't want her taking like, oh, we have this card now. Good, I'll take this to a competitive event. Like, that's not something that helps. But again, yeah. Do what you need to do.
100%. And yeah, obviously, do what works for you. But I think there is some real upside to, if you're going to do some foxes, like, you can do better than writing Dark Confidant on a swamp,
100%, yeah.
I think it is worth putting in a little bit of time to printing some nice ones.
No, exactly. And yeah, the other thing as well to remember is, when you're adding cards to a cube, if you are providing everyone with tokens, make sure you get the tokens for any additions, just because it helps keep everything nice and neat. It helps. Everyone will appreciate it slightly more, again, if your proxies are legible, if you're using proxies, but also that you have a version of the token. You don't always have to buy the tokens as well. Like obviously you can get those like dry rubber razors, that kind of stuff. But also, like, they've been like, because so many sets have had double-sided cards in them now, you can just, so many of my tokens are just like a quick doodle with the name of the token on those like double-face cards, and the other ones that you meant to write the names on above.
Okay, that's interesting. And then when you're making changes, I know your cube is pretty locked in size-wise at 540, right? I don't think that's ever changed.
Yeah, so mine's been a 541 because someone won 5 and added a fast bond. If you've been listening to the conversation, guess who that was. Yeah, I generally like to keep mine the same size because like it fits in the box, basically. But I do know some people, when they're testing new cards, they will just add that on top. So if they had a 540 cube and there was 20 cards they wanted to test, for that period of time, it would be a 560 cube. It's a very easy way of doing it. You just add cards on top. The one thing with that is like it can mess up like color balance, and it means a higher percentage of your cube won't be opened than intended. So if you have combos, it's something you need to consider. But it is an easy way of doing tests if there's something you wanted to do.
And then I think the final piece of advice that might be useful to people who are actually going through the process of maintaining a cube. I always very much appreciate it when we show up to a cube and there's changes, that you can just send us a link to the cube code there and we all can see exactly what changes there are. I tend to read through it on the bus on the way. What are the other sort of admin steps you do when you're actually when you're changing a bunch of cards?
Yeah, so there's different places where you can host your cube. I use Cube Cobra. I think it is the best one out there. There are other ones. I mean, I've not used all of them because I went from Cube Tutor, I think it was, to Cube Cobra and have had no reason to change. It's just been really, really good. I'm not affiliated with them in any way. Actually, I think I support their Patreon, actually. I don't know if that's me affiliated with them or me just, yeah.
Hashtag
whatever.
Not an ad.
Yes, hashtag
I
not
mean,
an
it's
ad.
the opposite of an ad.
It's
You're
the
paying them.
I'm paying them. Yeah, because I think their site is very good. Basically, Cube Cobra has a couple of really good things for keeping your cube updates. Firstly, it lets you have a maybe board. This lets you visually put out in front of you the cards that you're thinking of adding. Every card I'm thinking of adding to my cube, I will add to the maybe board, and it's just there on top. I can see it. I can send it to people, show people what I'm thinking of adding. It's just displayed there on your list. For the cards I'm thinking of cutting, you can also tag cards in Cube Cobra. So you can click on a card. At the bottom, there is a tag section. I just write the word cut on it. And then I can set that tag to be a certain color, and then I can just visually see all the cuts. Like, I can also filter all those tags, so I can filter all the cards I'm going to cut, so I just see them. That is very useful when you're going through your cube and picking the cards out, because just having a neat list of all the cards you're going to cut is super important, because even with that list, you're still going to be going through the cube multiple times, because there'll always be one card you've missed that you need to go through the whole 540 to get out again. When you do remove them, or when you make the changes, Cube Cobra then gives you the blog function. So that's the thing that James was talking about. That's what I send to everyone afterwards. It's basically, here is a list of all the changes I have made. And everyone can see them. It's all nice and neat. And then I can be told, why is this card gone? Where is my favorite? All this kind of stuff.
I didn't realize there was the tags thing. So can I see the cards that are in danger of being cut?
Oh yes, yeah.
Okay,
If you go on it now, so again, my link, my cube will down in the description below. I think they should just appear yellow in general. The ones that could be cut. I'm just checking on an incognito window quickly. Yeah. So if you look at my cube, all the ones that are yellow have the word "could cut" by them. So those are the ones that could be going.
Okay, so if any of my favorite cards are in danger, I can notice and then draft it and save them.
Oh, you're about to find out that Jace the Mind Sculptor's going, but that's a
not sure I'm bored with that. Yeah,
that's a conversation for another time, I think.
Cool. Yeah, that makes sense. Cube Cobra definitely sounds like a good system of other ones being available. Nice. Well, I must say, the output of your method is very good. So I think definitely worth checking out. Cool. Well, I think that was a really interesting insight into your cube building process. We will be back again in 2 weeks. If you did enjoy that, then please leave a 5-star review if your podcast app allows you to do so. If there are comments, then tell us what you vehemently disagree with. And well, you can find us online on Twitter. Dan is at Messam. I'm at James Andrew MTG. I can occasionally be found posting about cubes/limited. You can also find Dan, of course, on YouTube at 2sweetmtg. And I think that wraps it up for this week. Thanks for listening, and please do join again.